Travis Wayne Goodsell. I am going to attempt to read the full lawsuit against the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's thick and full pages. So I will do my best not to give commentary other than this introduction. This is what the church's lawyers, Curtin and McConkie, will be receiving on Monday. And they have until the stroke of midnight, when they turn into a pumpkin, on the 30th of March, 2020. Yeah. So that on the 31st, if the docket shows they have not responded, then I win again, as the judge in my case has refused to order the delivery of the process of service, and so I had to use Rule 4D for that. So understand that there's context that you may not know, purposely done this way so that I can slam them in a trial. So understand that. There's going to be some things here you're not going to understand if you haven't read my LDS church history or listened to the videos that I've done. That's also something you need to have a background prerequisite for. But anyway, and then of course the legal jargon you may not understand either. So alright, so 25th of November was when I filed the amended civil rights complaint. It's civil number 219 CV 00711 CW for Clark Waddups and EJF for Evelyn First. The jurisdiction is 42 USC 1985. That's for conspiracies. Alright. Travis Wayne Goodsell versus the Corporation of the President of the United States. Corporation of the President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I sometimes wonder if I should have theme music like Come Come You Saints or Onward Christian Soldiers in the background to distract from the traffic out there in the air unit. Alright, jurisdiction, conspiracy to interfere with civil rights, dealing with conspiracies. More than two people. Because it's under RICO, I can do that, because RICO, I promised I wasn't going to give commentary. So several pages, or several paragraphs on the jurisdiction. I'll just show it to you. I'm not going to read the law part. Okay, nature of the case. I've done the nature of the case video at least a couple of times, but we'll do it for this one big reading. Nature of the case. This is not a lawsuit against the religious entity, but the corporate entity. I need to show you how I did that. See that first sentence there? So that the lawyers cannot miss it. The defendant wants people to believe their religious and corporate entities are one and the same because they think they can get away with their crimes under the protection of the First Amendment by using the religion as a front for criminal activity. In the October 1984 General Conference of the defendant, Elder Ronald E. Pullman of the Quorum of 70 gave a talk titled "The Gospel and the Church," which the defendant ordered him to reshoot it later that week with a different edited version of his original talk. The defendant's insistence has deceived many Mormons who attack critics of the corporation as if those critics were attacking Mormon religion. Tax avoidance is another reason for wanting to claim their corporation as their religion, as they are estimated to be worth in the tens or hundreds of billions of dollars. We now know it's in the hundreds, which also allows them to hide their real financial wealth. Quote from George Kent, House Intelligence Committee impeachment hearings. "You can't promote principled anti-corruption action without pissing off corrupt people. My first filing was rushed in order to temporarily protect myself from assaults I've been getting, of which the defendant is the primary cause. With this filing, the defendant will want me dead this time rather than having me disappeared as they did before, or perpetually tortured using financial extortion and threats for compliance. The defendant is such a powerful crime organization that they don't need to directly order my murder, as they have agents who give loyalty oaths to them. Among the agents are a number of domestic terrorist gangs and groups, such as the Danites, the Mormon Mafia, Mormon white supremacist groups and gangs, Mormon Polynesian gangs, Mormon Mexican and Latino gangs, Scottish Rites Mormons, a new group with a Twitter account, #DesNat, and Mormon apologetic groups. I'm likely to be missing some. The defendant's arm also reaches into Utah government at all levels and in all branches, even to include federal. And the defendant also controls businesses and the economy of Utah. All of the defendant's agents give loyalty oaths to defend and protect the organization. I know all this because I am an agent of the defendant, born and raised into without my choice, and thus indoctrinated into trusting the organization and defending and protecting it. Now I have obtained the evidence against the defendant and will no longer allow them to bully me ever again. As such, I need this case kept public, and I intend to file a motion for news cameras to be allowed in the courtroom. In The Art of War by Sun Tzu, the greatest success against your enemy is to get them to destroy themselves or have them cause as much damage to themselves first before risking the lives of your soldiers. There are 3 phases of attack. And yeah, I made a mistake and there was actually 4. That's a good comment. 1. Send in agents to secretly infiltrate the enemy and spread misinformation and disinformation. 2. Censor and cut off information within and coming in and going out. 3. Shut off and cut off access to provisions, power, fuel, and utilities. This is called a fire sale. 4. Physically attack or invade once the enemy has sufficiently weakened, regardless of whether or not integral fighting has occurred and escalated to civil war. Coronavirus, had to say it. Our intelligence agencies have released that the Russians infiltrated America before the 1980s, when they were exposed. Though many sleeper cells still remain in America, they've also released that they interfered with the 2016 presidential election through misinformation and disinformation on social media platforms. In December 2018, FCC Chairman Ajit Pai stopped net neutrality. People were greatly concerned about internet no longer being free to surf and that throttling would occur. Instead, it allowed analytics to thrive. Cambridge Analytica was the most popular analytics program which helped the Russians with their mis- and disinformation campaign in 2016. The UK and the EU both banned analytic programs with their cookies that spy, hack, steal, and sell computer data of the people, whereas our current administration has done nothing to protect us, as I've been victimized still to this day. On 1 October 2019, the very day after I filed my original lawsuit, my website company switched analytical programs with no notification, destroying my online business and censoring my posting about my lawsuit. YouTube is now warning users that on 10 December 2019, they too will begin censoring, as they already have shut down my public account channel earlier in 2019. That again dealt with criticism of the defendant, as I tested to confirm that Russians are indeed using YouTube to attack Americans. Analytical programs are not statistics, but manipulate statistics to favor certain parties and censor others. This is done through dichotomous and non-dichotomous classification and categorization. The late Stanley Smith Stevens, a Mormon from Ogden, Utah, was the psychologist who organized this classification method, which is still used this day by Utah psychologists. To illustrate its use, our government has only two main parties. That control our nation, the Democrats and the Republicans. There are other ways to run a government, but we are forced to choose only from candidates of either of the two parties, which within each party are held primaries to determine which one candidate will run against the other party's candidate for an office. Within each party are subcategories of left, center, and right wings. And there are even further subcategories within those subcategories, usually with the word alt to describe the particular category being referred to. This categorization has conformed the thinking of many Americans who identify as one or the other party, and make the assumption that those who are not of their party or their party mindset must be of the other party and are therefore the enemy. I, for example, have been accused of being of another party and even threatened when I am not a follower of either party. Since the United States Constitution orders in Article 4 and 6 that we are not to have party government, i.e. Socialist Republic, as was the USSR, Cambridge Analytica's program categorized people into either liberal or conservative, then targeted their advertising back to those people to mis- and disinform based upon their liberal or conservative position. In 2016, when I was still on Facebook, I tried to warn my literal neighbors who were my friends, that they shouldn't fall for these propaganda ads, but I was unsuccessful. It has also been reported by our intelligence agencies that Russia has hacked and has full control over our nation's power stations. And as far back as 2015, MSNBC's Ari Melber was reporting that Russia was testing their ability to shut off a different town's power station every 4 days. Earlier this year, the Ochre power station was turned off for over 3 hours during the middle of the day, as the operator told me one thing and later learned Fox 13 News Utah was reporting a less significant outcome. The field of psychology and its subfields of psychiatry and therapy are all pseudoscience. They do not use scientific methods, practices, or procedures, as they just sit people on a couch and ask the victim to talk about their feelings for an hour session, for which they get paid a lot of money. So they have frauded the government into granting them medical doctor status of doctor-patient confidentiality and allow psychiatrists to be drug dealers addicting victims with no hope of recovery, because psychology declares they have no cure for mental illness. They don't even bother to look for a malady cause and are merely using addictive behavioral control drugs from big pharma companies who need lab rats for human experimentations. The government also grants psychologists expert witness status when they are an expert of nothing, because they don't physically examine the brain for a cause. Because they are not real medical doctors, they also are not bound by a Hippocratic oath to do no harm. Medical doctors know when legitimate physical displays of what is considered a mental illness in psychology, they can be traced in the brain to an actual malady or injury, which medical doctors are able to treat. Thus, there is no need for the field of psychology. My DNA results show I have no markers for any mental illness, because such markers don't exist, not just in me, but don't exist in the human body. Psychology's claim of the existence of mental illness is a fraud. Real brain problems such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's are treated by medical doctors. So post-traumatic stress disorder is not a mental illness, but a human response to traumatic events. This is why it is so disturbing that the defendant ordered me diagnosed as mentally ill and are still paying Dr. Kahn to this day. Thomas More said it best in his book, Utopia. For if you suffer your people to be ill-educated and their manners to be corrupted from their infancy, and then punish them for those crimes to which their first education disposed them, what else is to be concluded from this, but that you first make thieves and then punish them? So after Judge Dale Kimball denied my petition, it should be Benson, for redress of grievances, which included the defendant's plant as the Utah Attorney General couldn't let me go with defeat and forced a hearing to teach me a lesson. But Shurtleff didn't stop there, as he requested the state legislature to pass in 2008 a version of Rule R527-260, which I see they've just revised this year. It was clear the defendant was not going to leave me alone, so I turned a book I had been working on titled Modern American Utopia, inspired by Thomas More's Utopia, into a petition for a redress of grievances. I was already denied petitioning, so I just dropped it off at the Capitol building where the governor and the Utah Attorney General's offices are, the Matheson Courthouse, and the defendant's administration building. I was offering myself up if that's what they wanted to do to me, and I confirmed that is exactly what they wanted to do to me, as they disappeared me for 6 years. Through mistakes from key individuals' retirements, I was set free in 2014, and the assaults against me have resumed, and again I have to stand up to the bullying alone. But this time, the defendant's arrest of me in 2008 is the evidence against them, and I've been able to acquire much more because of my status as an agent for the defendant. The defendant has confessed to lying and deceiving me from their own evidence in their Gospel Topics essays on their website. I was miseducated by the defendant, and though I was tricked into being victimized by the criminal actions of the defendant committed against me, I was deceived into participating in their crimes upon others. But I was a person who wanted answers, so I also pursued answers to the Origin founder Joseph Smith Jr.'s translations and methods. As a result, I found the answers that confirmed Joseph's work, and yet the defendant had me blacklisted. What the defendant taught me from birth, to choose the right, was the excuse to punish me for. Right before I turned 18 years of age, I completed my work to become an Eagle Scout with the Boy Scouts of America. In my final interview, I was approved to become an Eagle Scout because of my honesty over loyalty to the organization. This lawsuit outlines the crimes committed against me by the defendant, because my parents and grandparents and most of my ancestors tied to the pioneers who settled in Salt Lake City under the defendant's founder, Brigham Young. I, too, was born and raised in the organization and had been faithful and active with the organization for almost 50 years, despite the abuses of the defendant and their agents towards me and others I've been a witness to. The defendant refers to the corporate leaders, which consists of a first presidency, a quorum of the 12 apostles, and the presidency of 70, with the general quorum of 70. Agents for the defendant refer to those who have been baptized and temple endowed within the religion of the defendant, and any and all who give aid and comfort to the defendant. Agents also include all those who witness the crimes against me but remain silent. All such persons are understood as complicit in the crimes against me, even if their silence is due to extortion threats to be silent by the defendant or their agents. As I indicated, I too have been an agent for almost 50 years. There is a distinct difference between the defendant, which consists of the corporation, and the front for the defendant's corporation, the religion. Evidence shows that the defendant has altered documents to preserve the perception that the corporation and the religion are one and the same, as the corporation impacts the religion and the leadership contains religious titles. But just as the stereotyped mafia crime organizations using sanitation as their front and have sanitation titles related to the business, so too is their crime organization separate from their sanitation work. As an agent of the defendant, I became privy to the crimes and corruption of the defendant, as I was extorted and threatened to be silent, complicit, and compliant in defending and protecting the defendant. I am not able to put into this lawsuit all of the crimes committed against me since my birth, and because this cannot be a criminal lawsuit, there are many crimes I cannot include my witness of. Because the defendant deceived me as to their status, that of being the true church, led directly by God, our God, I dismiss the defendant's criminal actions and admissions, trusting in the truth of their position. Also, because I pursued a defense of the defendant's claims founder, Joseph Smith Jr., and his work with translation of ancient languages, I was unaware of the truth of the defendant's real history, and even of the claimed founder's history. At the University of Lethbridge, I received a dual bachelor's in Bible Studies and Philosophy of Science, with a minor in classical languages of Biblical Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. At the University of Utah, I studied under Eva Vasilevska with her Anthropology of the Ancient Middle East. My education and subsequent research resulted in being the decipherer of Paleo-Hebrew and of Egyptian petroglyphs, and made the discovery in conjunction with another independent scholar, the late Dorothy Milne Murdoch, that the whole Bible derives mostly from ancient Egyptian stories portrayed in their petroglyphs. My results confirmed Joseph Smith Jr. did have an ability to translate. In 2014, I learned the defendant has officially declared that Joseph does not have the ability to translate. Evidence shows the defendant did know about my work and supported Joseph, and work that supported Joseph. But rather than assisting me to continue my work and release the information to the defendant's agents, I instead was blacklisted with a secret file as I was suppressed and censored and eventually was disappeared. In 2017, I began researching the organization's historical origins to establish whether or not the organization is in fact true. The same scientific methodology for researching the history is the same as my linguistic research as taught to me in my second bachelor's degree in philosophy of science. My results showed the defendant are frauds, and I can no longer give loyalty to the defendant, as their crimes and abuses of me cannot be justified as coming from a true God. I have published my research titled Real History of the Book of Mormon, The Truth About the Most Lied About Book, and had posted blogs on my website and vlogs on my YouTube until all sources got censored. The main reason why the defendant doesn't get their origin story correct is that they don't know it. Brigham Young and those who followed him knew nothing of the Smiths and those who started the organization with the Book of Mormon. And as such, they don't know the coding contained in the narratives either. In the 1835 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants, the names were coded, confirming they used coding. The coding in the Book of Mormon involves the books plagiarized within. And I'm quoting Jacob chapter 7, verses 26 and 27. And it came to pass that I, Jacob, began to be old, and the record of this people being kept on the other plates of Nephi. Wherefore I conclude this record, declaring that I have written according to the best of my knowledge, by saying that the time passed away with us, and also our lives passed away, like as it were unto us in a dream. We being a lonesome and a solemn people, wanderers, cast out from Jerusalem, born in tribulation, in a wilderness, and hated of our brethren, which caused wars and contentions, wherefore we did mourn out our days. And I, Jacob, saw that I must soon go down to my grave. Wherefore I said unto my son Enos, take these plates. And I told him the things which my brother Nephi had commanded me. And he promised obedience unto the commands. And I make an end of my writing upon these plates, which writing has been small. And to the reader I bid farewell, hoping that many of my brethren may read my words. Brethren, adieu. Robert Burns, The Mystic Tie, 1786, a farewell to the Mason brethren of the St. James Lodge, Tarbolton. Adieu, a heart-warm found adieu, dear brothers of the Mystic Tie. The St. James Lodge is of the Scottish Rites Freemasonry, and they have an origin legend of founder Stuart Jacobite. Joseph Smith Sr. was a master mason at the Ontario Lodge number 23 of Canandaigua, New York, a York Rites, as Hiram Smith, Hiram being spelled on his legal name spelling Hiram, not the current Hyrum. Second son of Smith Sr., was an entered apprentice at Mount Moriah Lodge number 112, Palmyra, New York, also a York Rites. Yet this term, Brethren Adieu, in the Book of Mormon comes from a famous Scottish Rites Mason. In Hebrew, Jacob means usurper. In Jacob 7, Jacob is the good guy. But later in the book, in 3 Nephi chapter 7, the usurping king of the secret evil society that fractured the kingdom of the Nephites right before the coming of Jesus Christ, is also named Jacob. The seal of the Scottish Rites is the two-headed Roman eagle, which is had by Russia. In 1826, Captain William Morgan, who fought under General Andrew Jackson, the same who was the 7th United States President, was attending York Rites lodges in western New York, telling them that he was writing 2 books for David Miller of the Batavia, New York Press. He was arrested in Canandaigua, New York, where Joseph Smith Sr., as a master mason, would have known William, and his arrest and his disappearance that sparked the anti-Mason movement that burned down most all of the Freemason temples, pushing Freemasonry underground for a while. Knowing the history, I now recognize the interpretation of the plates as William Morgan's books, Jacob as William Morgan, who usurped the knowledge of the conspiracy plot against the United States by Scottish Rites Masons. Jacob's brother Nephi is Joseph Smith Sr., who, as Master Mason, would have been the leader and planner despite William being of higher rank. And Enos would be William's apprentice, assisting with the transfer of manuscript pages to copper plates for publication. Because the Book of Mormon was written after the anti-Mason movement, the warning to America was meant to be in a future time, and gives us the clue to read the book of Revelation in the New Testament, where in chapter 12 specific future dates are given, and in chapter 13 identifies who Jacob will be and what he will do. John also talks about a false prophet who works for the dragon, as does the beast of chapter 13. The Book of Mormon instructs on how to identify a corrupt church. In the York Rites, the highest rank is the Order of Knights Templar, whose seal is of an empty cross with an empty crown hung on it. This has to do with the death of Jesus Christ and the Knights Templar preparing the way for the coming of the male child of Revelation 12, who is to restore the kingdom of David of the Old Testament. The York Rites personified Jesus as the character Hiram Abiff, whom both personify the Egyptian god Osiris, who was murdered, his kingdom usurped by his brother, and restored by his son. The second coming of Jesus was not to be understood by a Christ or Messiah as Christians understand him, but as the Jews understand him. Our current administrative leader has designated himself as being a king, and as his lawyers argue, Trump can't even be investigated for crime, let alone impeached and indicted, overthrowing the United States Constitution and even declaring himself as the chosen one. And as Nancy Pelosi told Trump in that famous meeting immortalized in a picture on Trump's Twitter account, and used also by Nancy Pelosi, all roads lead to Putin. But Joseph Smith Jr. was murdered, and his organization usurped by Brigham Young and others of the Scottish Rites Freemasons, who know nothing of the original organization's origins, and coding as the defendant's current CEO is doing business with Putin. The defendant wanting a temple in Russia, and Trump wanting a Trump Tower in Russia, making both compromise to Putin, who controls both. With my training as an Eagle Scout, I present this lawsuit, which represents an honest accounting of the crimes committed against me, as they also put at risk America's national security. My concern is that this lawsuit is too late, as the national security threat to America are reaching a climax with congressional impeachment hearings, and the next expected government shutdown on 21 December 2019, which will cause this lawsuit to be dropped. I attempted to obtain help from any and all known agencies, groups, individuals, and law firms, all of whom it is their job to assist me, but none of them would render my First Amendment rights over loyalty to the defendant. So having exhausted all my resources, I am forced to stand alone against a literal Goliath of wealth, power, influence, and control, not just in Utah, but all over the world, and a legal team. I have been forced before to pursue a lawsuit against the state of Utah and the defendant back in the 2000s, all by myself as well. And for having done that, the defendant retaliated by ordering the state to have me disappeared in 2008. As the defendant's state press removed all my article comments, I got skipped on the 2010 census, and the lawsuit filed against me was ordered sealed, not to mention my inability to communicate with the outside world. Those are not counts. That's just the, what's it called? I wasn't going to comment. Now I'm wasting time. That's just the nature of the case. So that's giving the reason why I'm filing the lawsuit. Now we get to the counts. Counts under 1. RICO Act, U.S. Code 1961, 4. 4 involves enterprise includes any individual, partnership, corporation, association, or other legal entity, and any union or group of individuals associated in fact, although not a legal entity. Count 1. The defendant claims true succession from the 1830 organization. Evidence shows the defendant is not the legally recognized successors in the decision of the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, complainant v. the Church of Christ at Independence, Missouri. Count 2. The defendant claims to be the true church along with succession from the 1830 organization. Evidence shows the defendant's organizers, led by Brigham Young, did not follow the founding organizers' process for succession of leadership after the murder of the founder, Joseph Smith, on 27 June 1844. From Doctrine and Covenants, section 107, 21 to 22. Of necessity, there are presidents, or presiding officers, growing out of, or appointed of, or from, among those who are ordained to the several offices in these two priesthoods. Of the Melchizedek priesthood, 3 presiding high priests, chosen by the body, appointed and ordained to that office, and upheld by the confidence, faith, and prayer of the church, form a quorum of the presidency of the church. This has never been practiced, and since my obtaining the Melchizedek priesthood, I've never been involved in a special Melchizedek priesthood session to vote for succeeding first presidency, nor has the defendant ever held such a vote. The defendant instead forces me and all other agents to give loyalty oaths during the defendant's general conferences called sustaining votes, and within the temples during the endowment ritual. Count number 3. The defendant has neglected to explain to me and other agents that the United States disincorporated the organization of the defendant and took away their United States citizenship status. The evidence of the Edmunds-Tucker Act, made law 3 March 1887 and upheld by the Supreme Court in 1890, though repealed in 1978, lays out the punishments imposed upon the defendant, which were kept secret from me as the defendant continued to claim a history void of this incident. Evidence of the defendant's 1923 submission of articles of incorporation and subsequent filings referred to the 1923 filing support the cover-up and fraud by the defendant, who continue to claim true succession as the true church. Count 4. The defendant has withheld its Freemasonry connections before 1842 and before the foundation of the original organization in 1830. This withholding also includes information about which lodge the founding Smith family belonged, and which lodge those of Brigham Young belonged. Evidence shows the Smiths were Masons of the York Rites lodges, as Joseph Smith Sr. was elevated to the rank of Master Mason. Evidence shows Brigham Young's group were Scottish Rites Masons, as Heber C. Kimball, grandfather of the defendant's CEO, Spencer W. Kimball, was also a Master Mason. Probably should put former CEO. The defendant has failed to inform me upon receiving my temple initiation rites in 1989 that I was now a part of the Scottish Rites Lodge version of Brigham Young and not the York Rites of the Smiths. The difference of the lodges involves differences of understanding and interpretation of codes and symbols. Significance of this information involves the national security threat incident involving the arrest and disappearance of Captain William Morgan of the York Rites in 1826. More to be brought up about this in other counts. Count 5. By not informing me of which Freemason lodge I and other agents are giving oaths of loyalty to, the defendant has deceived me as to which side of the current national security threat I'm on. The founder, Joseph Smith Jr., warned of a future threat to America, specifically to the failure of the Constitution with the installment in the United States presidency of a king. The defendant has deceived me into believing I was on the side of defending America from its threat, that the defendant, claiming to be the true church and successor, was going to enlist me and the other agents to save the United States Constitution and America from falling into the hands of the American coup. Evidence from the defendant at general conferences since the latest CEO's successor's installment in April 2018 and the defendant's involvement in the religious freedom movement shows that the defendant is supportive of America's coup and destruction. Count 6. The defendant has deceived me into believing that a local mob of citizens murdered the original founder, Joseph Smith Jr., and his brother Hiram. The trial resulted in an acquittal of the accused, and the real murderers were never punished. My re-examination of the evidence shows John Taylor murdered Hiram Smith, and Willard Richards murdered Joseph Smith Jr. The defendant are not only frauds as to their credentials, but are the ones who murdered the original founder to usurp his position and organization. Evidence shows confirmation of the usurpation and the rewards given to the assassins, and Utah yearly celebrates the fleeing from justice rather than the sacrifice of the original founder. Count 7. The defendant has forced me to make a loyalty oath of secrecy under penalty of death to the defendant as the true church, but also to them as a secret counter-authoritarian monarchical government to the United States. from the pre-1991 Temple Covenant of the Law of Consecration. You and each of you covenant and promise before God, angels, and these witnesses at this altar that you do accept the law of consecration as contained in this, the Book of Doctrine and Covenants, in that you do consecrate yourselves, your time, talents, and everything with which the Lord has blessed you, or with which he may bless you, to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, for the building up of the kingdom of God on the earth, and for the establishment of Zion. The defendant has deceived me as to their status, once in the Salt Lake Valley under Brigham Young, as the Kingdom of Deseret, a separate nation from America, usurping the land of Mexico and establishing an authoritarian monarchy. Count 8. The defendant has deceived me as to the religion I am to be following. Evidence from the defendant shows that Brigham Young, upon taking over those who would follow him to Salt Lake, drastically altered the whole religion of the original founder, Joseph Smith Jr. After the punishments of the Edmunds-Tucker Act, the disincorporated defendant altered the religion again. Over time, further alterations were made until my birth. The defendant deceived me into believing the religion I was practicing is the exact same religion of the original founders' organization. Once I moved into Utah and presented the defendant with my decipherment and work with Paleo-Hebrew, they placed me on their blacklist filing as a troublemaker. The defendant's agents, likewise, have been engaged in punishing me with assaults, threats, torture, and disappearance because of my adherence to the original founders' religion. Count 9. The defendant's first presidency and quorum of 12 all claim the titles of prophet, seer, revelator, and translator, though for several decades now they don't claim the title of translator. They claim the mistranslated book of Amos 3:7. Surely the Lord God will do nothing, but he revealeth his secret unto his servants the prophets. The defendant skips the next verse, which says that a prophet is not to keep secrets a secret, but warn others. As the name of the defendant's organization includes Latter-day Saints, there is an understanding, an expectation that the defendant would warn Mormons of danger rather than generally give restrictive commandments and told to trust them by being obedient. Only CEO Gordon B. Hinckley announced that the prophecy of Joel had all been fulfilled. The problem is that he was decades too early, as I was deceived into believing in a different latter days as the promised Jesus Christ didn't return to earth. Count 10. In 1967, the New York Metropolitan Museum negotiated the giving of the papyri brought by Joseph Smith Jr., which he used to make the Book of Abraham. CEO David O. McKay passed the papyri to Hugh Nibley at BYU. Instead of finishing where Joseph left off, the world's Egyptologists got to examine the papyri and, of course, couldn't find the Hebrew name Abraham on the Egyptian language papyri. When I approached the defendant back in 1998 with my Paleo-Hebrew decipherment, the defendant blacklisted me to keep their secret of not being translators, and in 2008 retaliated by ordering my disappearance. I need a breather. Those are the counts under count 1, or counts under title 1. So now I'm going on to counts under title 2 for treason. So since I'm at 50 minutes right now, I'm going to split this up again, and I'll put this in a playlist, and I'll upload this, and then I'll try my best to finish the rest of the book, because we got a chunk, a few pages, but we still have a ton. So if this mount is 50 minutes, we're looking at several hours. I told you this was long. There are tons of crimes committed by the church just against me. So I'll upload this, and I'll breathe, and then come back.